Chris Lee, Blayne Gilmer, and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14. We are here to predict every single SEC football game of the season. Right now, we are doing Florida and Georgia, the annual, don't call it the world's largest cocktail party game in Jacksonville. Georgia's a 22-point favorite. Depending on where you see this, we're doing this on Sunday night. 54-point over-under. That implies a final of 38-16 in the Bulldogs' favor. This one can be seen 3:30 Eastern on CBS. Let's see. Florida had an off week. Georgia had an off week. So these teams should be fairly well rested as they tee it up in Jacksonville, Blayne.
Absolutely. And, that's always the big deal there for these two squads historically. Just get rested up and go into literally like a blood feud. I mean, these teams have no love lost for each other, and absolutely you can throw the records out when it comes to this game because the energy will be high. Kirby Smart talks about it every time for years now. He says, listen, these guys recruit literally in our backyard and us in theirs, and back and forth, those kind of battles historically. So it's always interesting from that standpoint. And it's Florida hasn't had the season that they would have wanted to this point, but they're not devoid of talent. And Georgia, although they're ranked the number one team in the country, Blake, there's been times where they've stubbed their toe, especially early in games.
Yep, there has, and I think we've started to see them correct some of those things that we talked about several weeks ago, and I feel like it's kind of a situation now with Georgia where obviously this is a significant game, and then of course the one next week that could be even more significant depending on what the results look like this week with Tennessee, Kentucky. So yeah, I think to this point, I think it goes back to what Blayne talked about before. Even though Georgia, maybe there have been times where you're like, well, maybe they're, I don't even want to say beatable because I don't think that's the right word. I think it's more of some holes at times. But the thing is, we talked about the reloading of the roster, and yet here they are still, the top team in the country for a lot of people. And now they head into this as, 3 touchdown favorites over Florida in this one. So,
yeah, that line is just kind of incredible if you just stepped out of a years-long slumber and didn't know the recent history and you saw that. That's insane. But anyway, when Georgia's got the ball, Bulldogs averaging 41.7 points, 527 yards, 7.26 yards per play. That's a really gaudy number there. The Gators are giving up 28.1 points. That's a very un-Florida-like number. Allowing 429 yards a game. In fact, Florida is gaining 430, so that Florida is getting and giving up the pretty much exact same amount of yardage per game. Now, where that's different is per play. Florida only giving up 5.96 yards per snap, which is pretty good. Blayne Stetson Bennett has been money most of the last couple of years. He's the guy that really makes that offense go, and I'm just curious to see how this matches up against the Gator defense.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about this Florida team, they've certainly one area that they've had problems with is defending the run, and that comes into play when you are talking about Stetson Bennett because Hendon Hooker had success. People don't still, after 2.5 years of seeing Stetson Bennett just take off and torch defenses, they still like, oh, he's sneaky fast, that kind of stuff. But the guy can run. He's a 4.5 40. He can. They call him Stet the Jet for a reason, So he gets out and he can move. I think you'll see that come into play in this game, whether it's naked boots or whether it's the zone read, that kind of stuff. They pick their spots with Stetson. One thing that's interesting with Georgia is as Todd Monken has implemented a little bit more this year of some designed quarterback draw type plays, some lead draw type plays for Bennett. And I think that's because of the belief in their backup quarterback, Carson Beck, honestly, and how he is in case something does happen to Stetson. But you're right. He's been a very efficient money on third down and fourth down. Georgia has not failed to convert a fourth down this year. Every time they've gone for it on fourth down, they've gotten it. So it's and that some of that's in passing as well, not just short yardage. So Stetson Bennett's going to get a weapon back this week. Blake, he's getting A.D. Mitchell, #1 receiver from last year, the guy who made the big catch in the national title game. So he's been out for several weeks. So given this Georgia offense, it's already pretty potent. A strong weapon back is going to be important for the Bulldogs.
Yeah, I mean, let's call it what it is. If you just look at the stats, I mean, Georgia offensively against Florida defensively, there is a significant edge in favor of the Bulldogs here. Like, it is one that, like you said a minute ago, Chris, when you kind of look at, even if it's just the points per game given up, if you go deeper into the stats and you're like, this is, a rivalry game we've talked about over the years, like, this is pretty one-sided, guys. If you just look at the stats, like, it's one where Georgia could put up some points here. You look at the total yardage. I think Florida's 1/10, 436.9 is the average there. Passing yards given up almost 245, rushing yards, a ton of those too, 193. So, I mean, this is, like you said, Chris, this is not the Florida defense of old by any means. And I think this is one of those, if you're talking about Billy Napier's, what are the top priorities for him moving forward as a coach and getting this program back where it wants to be, I think it's very clear that a lot of that's going to start with trying to kind of figure out what to do defensively and be able to figure out some things that they have not been able to figure out to this point. So
before we get to the other side of the ball, there's some big games coming up in the league this week to add some extra excitement. We at Southeastern 14 are making some predictions in the Stakes app. That's STAKES. We want to see if you guys agree or disagree with our takes. Go to playwithstakes.com/14. Sign up for Stakes. Place your predictions on our questions. And you can find our predictions at our handle, Southeastern 14. Let us know if you like our picks or if you don't. If you use the invite code, Southeastern 14, when you sign up, you'll get a double welcome bonus. Okay, guys. Florida's offense has been up and down. It's averaging 31.4 points a game. It is averaging 430 yards a game, 7.2 yards a snap. Georgia's been tremendous. It's not been the 2021 Georgia defense, but 9.1 yards a game. 9.1 points a game given up.
Sometimes it feels like 9.1 yards.
Well, occasionally, but not very often. Georgia only giving up 247 yards of offense and 4.44 yards per snap. Goodness. Florida's been a sneaky good run team. And, of course, Stetson Bennett, not the only fast quarterback in this matchup here. So I'm very interested to see how that plays out, Blayne.
Yeah, listen, in the first half of the Auburn game, there were some times where Robbie Ashford caused Georgia some fits with his athleticism, and I think Anthony Richardson is a whole other caliber of athleticism. So I'm sure there will be some. If I was Billy Napier, let's put it this way, I would be running Anthony Richardson a good bit. They've been, for some reason, the announcers at the games and stuff like that, the sideline reporters keep pointing to they're not confident in the backup quarterback situation. So that's why they don't run Anthony Richardson as much in case of injury. But I think in order for Florida to be successful, it's going to be, if they do so, they've got to use that experienced offensive line, get Anthony Richardson some design runs, and then Etienne and Montrell Johnson have to run hard and create some problems. There were a couple of games, heck, late in that Kent State game with Georgia, where everybody was shocked that it was so close. Kent State ran right down the field on them a couple of times late in that game. So it's going to be incumbent upon Georgia to stop the run first. Kirby Smart knows that. Billy Napier knows that he knows that. So on the downs where they get one-on-one coverage on the outside, can Florida's receivers separate, and can Anthony Richardson be accurate with the football down the field? I'm sure Georgia's going to do a lot of exotic pressures and some disguising of coverage back there, Blake, to really test Anthony Richardson's football acumen back there a little bit.
Well, like you said, they're going to, I mean, that's the thing is you're going to make him throw the ball as many times as he can. You're going to certainly understand that what he can do with his legs and how that can kind of change the dynamic of Florida's offense. But, I mean, we talked about it, right? It really kind of bookend the stats on this where he's only had 2 games this season. He hasn't thrown an interception. That was game 1 against Utah. This last game against LSU. His 2 best rushing games of the season. First game against Utah, this last game against LSU. So when you kind of look at those things in particular, if you're Georgia, again, you're going to make him throw the ball because you're going to kind of look at the trends and say, well, he's probably going to throw an interception somewhere. And what can that do for us to kind of capitalize on that? And again, going up against this defense, we kind of talk about in some of these previews what teams have seen to this point, what they haven't seen. I mean, again, this is a defense that Florida has not seen yet in terms of what Georgia can do. So I think that puts all the pressure on Anthony Richardson. I think that pressure's been there all season. And again, it's just like you said, Blayne, I think you got to find a way to get him more opportunities on the ground because if you can do that, that just adds another dynamic, which, oh, by the way, a guy named Jaden Daniels, I'm not saying Anthony Richardson is Jaden Daniels, but we saw what Jaden Daniels did in terms of what he could do. And so when you have a guy like that, which we always talk about, that has that ability to kind of do both, but can do as many things with your rushing attack, we know Richardson can do it. It's just like you mentioned, are they going to let him do it? So,
okay, guys, I always come to this point where I give you the miscellaneous stats that you might not think of. Both teams +3 in turnover margin. These may be the league's, I think they're the second and third least penalized teams in the league. Florida giving up 37 yards of penalties a game. Georgia 39. Special teams, FEI had Georgia's special teams ranked number 39 in the country. Florida's were ranked 11th. They've not adjusted for this weekend's games, but neither team played. So pretty even. Florida a little bit better on special teams. But, Blake, this is always the part where you throw in the little miscellaneous things on history and over-unders and things like that. So I'm going to throw it to you for that, if that's cool.
Well, I mean, that's what you have to do at this point, because I think when you look at this game overall, statistically, the only thing that seems to be in Florida's favor is the fact that Georgia is more penalized. All the other kind of bigger categories are in Georgia's favor here. And when you look at the numbers, the favorite 6-1 against the spread via covers in the last 7 meetings between these two teams. Obviously, Georgia favored here. If you kind of look at just the overall here for Florida, some of the recent trends, the under seems to be one for Georgia that's happening a lot, which is not surprising, right? Given Georgia's defense, that's kind of a trend you see in some of the recent betting trends with Georgia. Florida, meanwhile, I don't know if you guys realize this, going back to last season, Florida's 1-7 against the spread in SEC games going back to last season. You don't know, the only game they've covered in was the one against Tennessee, where they made the late score 38-33. That was the only one. So I just, look, guys, I find it, I just said, I mean, you look at it statistically, I think Georgia, if their offense is clicking, you talked about it, Blayne, getting a playmaker back, you add that to the mix, I just think Georgia's going to put up a lot of points here, and I just worry about Florida's efficiency offensively and their ability maybe not to have some of those turnovers against this Georgia defense. So I'm going to lean on Georgia here, and quite honestly, I think they cover the spread even as big as it is.
Yeah, one thing that we've said before, man, a spread this big in a Georgia-Florida game. One thing, one of the guys out in Vegas that sets this line, what he may have done is he may have re-listened to that halftime speech last year, the very profane one that Kirby Smart had out there, because what that does is it gives you a measure of how much Kirby Smart hates Florida as a former Georgia player. I mean, there is no love lost there, and he wants to absolutely put his foot on Florida's throat whenever he can. I think that he's going to get the opportunity this weekend. Don't look for any mercy. And this is Billy Napier's first taste of it. There's no real hatred there, I don't feel like, but he's going to get indoctrinated into the hate this week. Georgia wins and covers, Chris.
Okay. Georgia wins this game. The numbers suggest I'm going to be wrong in this, but I've watched Billy Napier's teams. They played really well some weeks. As you mentioned, darn near beat Tennessee and Knoxville. 22 is a lot of points, guys. I know Georgia could cover it on a good day easily, but I just think Florida's got some talent too. 54 seems a little bit low for me. Again, Florida's kind of got an underrated running game. Richardson, part of that. Georgia wins, but I'm going to take Florida to cover, and I'm going to take the over in this one too. So in any case, we're previewing every single SEC game of this football season. So best way to get those, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon at Southeastern 14.